What's up, guys? This is Teresa, and welcome to Story Catholic. I help Christians master their story so they can impact the world. And today, I wanted to talk about Harrison Butker's address to Benedictine College for the students who are graduating. There's quite a bit of controversy around this address, and so I wanted to take the time to go through his speech and talk about my perspective as a Catholic woman. Let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 2024, I would like to start off by congratulating all of you for successfully making it to this achievement today. By making it to this moment through all the adversity thrown your way from COVID, I hope you learned the important lessons that suffering in this life is only temporary. As a group, you witnessed firsthand how bad leaders who don't stay in their lane can have a negative impact on society.
Now, I want to take a moment to mention that he is about 54 seconds into his speech, and he's already touching on one concept, and that is to stay in your lane. He already is going right in for the jugular of attacking leaders. So let's hear what he has to say about leaders. This is important when we get into the importance of how to share your story in a way that impacts the world and connects with your audience. Let's hear what he has to say.
It is through this lens that I want to take stock of how we got to where we are and where we want to go as citizens and, yes, as Catholics. One last thing before I begin. I want to be sure to thank President Minnis and the board for their invitation to speak. When President Minnis first reached out a couple of months ago, I had originally said no. You see, last year I gave the commencement address at my alma mater, Georgia Tech, and I felt that one graduation speech was more than enough, especially for someone who isn't a professional speaker.
Now, I like here that he's bringing in humility. He's telling a little bit about his background story so we know what his feelings are about giving the speech. So right there, I feel like he is definitely humbling himself and he's trying to connect with the audience at a base level.
But of course, President Minnis used his gift of persuasion and spoke to the many challenges you all faced throughout the COVID fiasco and how you missed out on so many milestones the rest of us older people have taken for granted.
So I want to make a point here that he is talking specifically to a Catholic audience. He's a Catholic himself, and he's clearly connecting with them on an inside joke level. So he knows the people that are high up at the college just the same way that the students do. So I think it's interesting here that we're already seeing the way that he is building rapport with his audience. Let's listen more.
While COVID might have played a large role throughout your formative years, it is not unique. Bad policies and poor leadership have negatively impacted major life issues.
So we can see here that his thread he keeps bringing in is this thesis of bad leadership. So let's hear what he has to say, because this seems like a very central theme in the story he's trying to tell.
Things like abortion, IVF, surrogacy, euthanasia, as well as a growing support for degenerate cultural values in media, all stem from the pervasiveness of disorder.
So again, these topics he's bringing up, he's speaking into a Catholic audience. And so whereas this might seem very controversial to people outside of this audience, for his audience, this isn't going to fall on deaf ears.
Our own nation is led by a man who publicly and proudly proclaims his Catholic faith, but at the same time is delusional enough to make the sign of the cross during a pro-abortion rally.
So this seems to me like the whole point of bringing in that thesis of leadership. This is kind of the first point he's really making on this, is going after Biden. So let's hear what else he has to say.
He has been so vocal in his support for the murder of innocent babies that I'm sure to many people, it appears that you can be both Catholic and pro-choice. He is not alone. From the man behind the COVID lockdowns to the people pushing dangerous gender ideologies onto the youth of America, they all have a glaring thing in common. They are Catholic. This is an important reminder that being Catholic alone doesn't cut it. These are the sorts of things we are told in polite society to not bring up. You know, the difficult and unpleasant things. But if we are going to be men and women for this time in history, we need to stop pretending that the Church of Nice is a winning proposition.
Now, something I want to point out that he's saying here, he says men and women. So I think it's important to note that he is not just saying men need to speak out against these things. He's saying men and women. So I do think that that's also important to include, since there's so much controversy around the gender side of what he's about to say here in a second. And so I just want to drop that point in here.
We must always speak and act in charity, but never mistake charity for cowardice. It is safe to say that over the past few years, I've gained quite the reputation for speaking my mind. I never envisioned myself nor wanted to have this sort of a platform, but God has given it to me, so I have no other choice but to embrace it and preach more hard truths about accepting your lane and staying in it.
Okay, so this is important because when he talks about he is feeling like he's being called to speak into hard truth, there's something that we really need to be careful about when we are public speakers, and that is one word: diplomacy. And so something that I really want to talk about as we're trekking through the next aspects of this speech is the concept of how he is being diplomatic and how maybe there's room for growth in approaching some of these topics. Clearly, he's already dropped a lot of different controversial topics in society and in politics. And so he's already in hot water, generally speaking. And so I would recommend in these kinds of places, you want to give as many disclaimers as you want. And this isn't a way of softening hard truths, as he would call them. It's a way of being able to reach your audience effectively in a way that they will be receptive to. So let's hear what else he has to say.
As members of the church founded by Jesus Christ, it is our duty and ultimately privilege to be authentically and unapologetically Catholic. Don't be mistaken, even within the church, people in polite Catholic circles will try to persuade you to remain silent. There even was an award-winning film called Silence, made by a fellow Catholic, wherein one of the main characters, a Jesuit priest, abandoned the church and as an apostate, when he died, is seen grasping a crucifix, quiet and unknown to anyone but God.
So something I want to drive home here as a Catholic woman and someone who teaches people how to share their stories and figure out what their calling is and how to step into that calling. I think it's really important, especially as we're talking about this concept of staying in our lane, is that we really need to appreciate that there are lanes outside of our own. So if he is personally called to share and become a public speaker and do what he's doing, like going into these and giving these addresses to students that are graduating, it's great and that's awesome, but we need to be really careful that we're not throwing shade at other lanes, because I believe that the body of Christ is far and wide, and there are many different callings that manifest in different ways. And so whereas he might be called to really be outspoken and vocal and delivering hard truths, that's not everybody's lane. And so it's important to not try to diminish other people's lanes by thinking that yours is more important, because we need all aspects of the body of Christ. And there's a diplomatic way to be excited about your calling without diminishing other people's callings. So that's just a point that's coming up for me as he's talking. So let's hear more.
As a friend of Benedictine College, His Excellency Bishop Robert Barron said in his review of the film, "It was exactly what the cultural elite want to see in Christianity: private, hidden away, and harmless. Our Catholic faith has always been countercultural. Our Lord, along with countless followers, were all put to death for their adherence to her teachings. The world around us says that we should keep our beliefs to ourselves whenever they go against the tyranny of diversity, equity, and inclusion."
I do have to say that I really resonate with what he has to say, especially because of the culture and climate we live in now, where there is a lot of censorship of Christian ideals. And so I do appreciate that he is being very encouraging to people who maybe they're on the precipice of a call to go into public speaking. Also, we live in a climate now in the digital era where anybody can share online. And so I really love that he's talking about this, because I am also passionate about inspiring others to share their stories and share what they're passionate about and what the Lord has put on their heart to go around and help other people with. And so I think he's really trying to hit on the heart of that. So I can appreciate where he's coming from, because I feel like that's probably what he's trying to do, is to encourage people to boldly share their faith, which I do believe is more important than ever before. So I do really like what he's saying here. Let's hear more.
"We fear speaking truth because now, unfortunately, truth is in the minority. Congress just passed a bill where stating something as basic as the biblical teaching of who killed Jesus could land you in jail. But make no mistake, before we even attempt to fix any of the issues plaguing society, we must first get our own house in order, and it starts with our leaders."
So I have a little bit of an issue of what he's saying here. When we talk about getting our own house in order, I think it's really important for us to look within and look at ourselves, take the log out, right? And I think this is where I lost him a little bit when I watched this, because he starts to attack, we're going to get into it in a second, but he starts to go down a lane that's not his own. And it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I actually want to back this up so we can listen one more time to what he just said.
"Make no mistake, before we even attempt to fix any of the issues plaguing society, we must first get our own house in order, and it starts with our leaders."
He says that getting our own house in order starts with our leaders. See, I'm a little bit more of what you could say maybe in libertarian land, small side, where it's like, let's look at ourselves individually and how we fit into the body of Christ. And that's where I feel more comfortable. But I will also say that maybe perhaps he himself is feeling a call to step into politics, which is fine. So again, I'll practice what I preach here. I don't want to throw shade at his lane if that's what is in his heart and he is feeling like, okay, I really want to speak into the leadership, so be it. So let's see what he has to say.
The bishops and priests appointed by God as our spiritual fathers must be rightly ordered. There's not enough time today for me to list all the stories of priests and bishops misleading their flocks, but none of us can blame ignorance anymore and just blindly proclaim that that's what Father said. Because sadly, many priests we are looking to for leadership are the same ones who prioritize their hobbies or even photos with their dogs and matching outfits for the parish directory.
This is absolutely ridiculous to me. I feel like he really lost me here because he is now turning around and throwing shade at the priesthood. I have a big issue with this. He's not a priest. This is way out of his lane. And whereas us as lay people, yes, we can speak to what we need to speak to, but this sounded very, I'm just going to say it, tone deaf. There should be nothing wrong with your priest taking a picture with the dog for phone directory. It sounds a little bit funny. And so I think we just need to be really careful and lighten up a little bit, especially when it comes to being such a big public person like he is. There will be non-Catholics, as we know, looking at this material, and people might be like, what is happening? And they might get really turned off to Catholicism when he's highlighting maybe a small portion of what's going on and maximizing that. And so we just need to be careful. And in these types of situations, I will just say, as a journalist, I would recommend involving a disclaimer, giving a disclaimer. If you're going to speak into something, that's fine, but let's give a disclaimer so that people can receive it better. But also it just feels in general like this came out of left field to start attacking bishops and priests. It gets worse.
It's easy for us laymen and women to think that in order for us to be holy, that we must be active in our parish and try to fix it. Yes, we absolutely should be involved in supporting our parishes, but we cannot be the source for our parish priests to lean on to help with their problems.
This was also pretty tone deaf because we are all human, and this dehumanized priests, in my opinion. I thought that this really didn't make a whole lot of sense with the rest of where he was going. To take the attack that he made on Biden for making the sign of the cross at a pro-abortion rally and then going straight into attacking bishops and priests for things like taking pictures with dogs and needing support because they're human. I just felt like this really was starting to lose me. So let's see where he's going to take this.
Just as we look at the relationship between a father and his son, so too should we look at the relationship between a priest and his people.
I think it's so important to consider that priests absolutely need our support. They have and we're talking about vocation. He goes into vocation for women. Priesthood, and if you look at nuns too, this is a big part of this too, as he's about to start talking about women. But vocationally, there are different lanes, right? And so I think that he is coming over here and talking about the priesthood lane in a way that is diminishing, and it's not encouraging, and it's not building up, it's breaking it down. And if you have something important to say it. But I don't see at this point anything that important. And also when you're talking about the demographic he's speaking to, I feel like these sorts of speeches really should be focusing on building up and encouragement. And I feel like he was doing a really good job of that up to a certain point. He was making some good points politically that I think were hard truths that needed to be shared. But when he started to talk about the priesthood in this way, this is really where I started to go, maybe he needs to get back in his lane. So let's hear what else he has to say.
Tragically, so many priests revolve much of their happiness from the adulation they receive from their parishioners. And in searching for this, they let their guard down and become overly familiar. This undue familiarity will prove to be problematic every time because, as my teammate's girlfriend says, familiarity breeds contempt.
Whereas I can see his point here where familiarity breeds contempt and those sorts of things and holiness and lay people and okay, whatever, I get it. But to me as a public speaker and someone who teaches how to share stories, looking at this, it seems a little bit all over the place. It feels like he's kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and he's complaining. And so what I would have liked to have seen a little bit is if he wants to make his points that were more political up front, that's fine. But it now feels like he's kind of going down a laundry list and throwing shade in different ways. And so I think I'm just going to speak for myself. I was feeling a little bit at this point like, where is he going with this? Like, what? Like, are we just going to sit here and now complain, or here's the thing. It's so easy to break things down and criticize, but on the other side of that, how can we encourage? How can we speak to the things that are going right, elevating those things so that those things can be magnified? That's just kind of what I am looking at here, where it's like, I'm wondering like why he's talking about this. It feels a little bit offbeat. And then I'm wondering again, where is he taking this? Because I feel at this point, we're spiraling down into complaint land. So let's hear where this goes.
St. Jose Maria continues that some want to see the priest as just another man. That is not so. They want to find in the priest those virtues proper to every Christian, and indeed every honorable man: understanding, justice, a life of work, priestly work in this instance, and good manners. It is not prudent as the laity for us to consume ourselves in becoming amateur theologians so that we can decipher this or that theological teaching, unless, of course, you are a theology major.
At this point, it felt like he was sort of going into Protestant land and discussing things like elevation of the pastor or people interpreting scripture on their own and sort of things like that felt to me a little bit tone deaf from a Catholic audience. Because let me give an example. When it comes to public speakers or creators or influencers that are Catholic, they're going to be drawing people, if they're going to be talking about theology, they'll be drawing people to the catechism, to the church, and the church teachings on things. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with any Catholic who wants to step forward and talk about theology, as long as they are in alignment with the magisterium of the church and they're pointing people to the church fathers and the Catholic belief on things.
We must be intentional with our focus on our state in life and our own vocation. And for most of us...
See, I think this is really ironic that he's saying we all need to be really focused on our own vocation. And he said it, right? And that's good. But I'm seeing a little bit of a discrepancy between him saying that and then overall what the speech is saying, which is, it felt to me like he was elevating his particular way of thinking above the other people's way of thinking, other different lanes of thinking. And we're going to get more into that as this unfolds.
That's as married men and women. Still, we have so many great resources at our fingertips that it doesn't take long to find traditional and timeless teachings that haven't been ambiguously reworded for our times. Plus, there are still many good and holy priests, and it's up to us to seek them out. The chaos of...
Okay, so that was balanced. See, so he did tie in the balance. And this is where I think that if he had tied in more disclaimers to begin with, or maybe given us a little bit of summary of what we were going to talk about, it would help us know kind of where we were going. But I feel like he's trying to tie that back in. So I feel like, okay, we landed a little bit. I feel a little bit more grounded. Okay, let's go.
The world is unfortunately reflected in the chaos in our parishes, and sadly, in our cathedrals too. As we saw during the pandemic, too many bishops were not leaders at all. They were motivated by fear of being sued, fear of being removed, fear of being disliked. They showed by their actions, intentional or unintentional, that the sacraments don't actually matter.
This really actually upset me. So I think he needs to be really careful with saying this, I will just say, because in the middle of the pandemic and bishops and priests were deciding how to handle the congregation and handle the host in those situations, like for him to make that claim that they didn't think the Eucharist was important, yeah, that's a little bit, I wouldn't have said that. And I'm concerned with that attitude and being very abrasive and feeling justified in saying those kinds of things publicly as big of a public figure as he is. Throwing shade in that way is very concerning, because we need to make sure that like we're capturing the truth here. And he's saying, okay, hard truths. And this is kind of his shtick he's going on. He wants to spit the hard truths. And so he's doing a lot of like criticism here. But I think we should be really, really careful as Catholics to make statements like that. That could be, I'm just going to leave it at that. That was a little bit, it felt like a crossing of the line to make a determination like that fallacious, in my opinion.
Because of this, countless people died alone. And
if he's going to say something like that, also, I'm just going to say, as a journalist, he would need to bring actual evidence of that. Like if he's going to say that, he needs to bring some quotes that are going to support that that's the case. So we just got to be really careful when you're going to make statements like that.
Without access to the sacraments, and it's a tragedy we must never forget. As Catholics, we can look to so many examples of heroic shepherds who gave their lives for their people and ultimately the church. We cannot buy into the lie that the things we experienced during COVID were appropriate. Over the centuries,
the thing is, it's not the priest's fault. That's just my opinion. That opinion alert, there's my disclaimer. I think we need to be really careful because I think that at that time, everybody was trying to do the best they could. And that was a lot of pressure on the dioceses to make those types of decisions. So I just think that as a community, as a Catholic community, we should try to be as supportive of each other as possible, give the benefit of the doubt as much as we can, especially when we're talking about something like the importance and sanctity of the Eucharist.
There have been great wars, great famines, and yes, even great diseases, all that came with a level of lethality and danger. But in each of those examples, church leaders leaned into their vocations and ensured that their people received the sacraments.
Okay, I can see where he's coming from.
Great saints like St. Damien of Malachi, who knew the dangers of his ministry, stayed for 11 years as a spiritual leader to the leper colonies of Hawaii. His heroism is looked at today as something set apart and unique, when ideally it should not be unique at all. For as a father loves his child, so a shepherd should love his spiritual children too. That goes even more so for our bishops, these men who are present-day apostles. Our bishops once had adoring crowds of people kissing their rings and taking in their every word, but now relegate themselves to a position of inconsequential existence.
He's making really sweeping generalizations here. So again, I want to say tone deaf, but I don't want to be mean. But we'll just keep tracking here.
Now, when a bishop of a diocese or the bishops' conference as a whole puts out an important document on this matter or that, nobody even takes a moment to read it, let alone follow it.
Again, that's a generalization. I feel like these are opinions he's sharing, but he's not providing evidence to support these things. And because it's not my experience, it's making me feel like, okay, he it seems like he's really making blanket statements for Catholics when there's a wide spread of experiences when it comes to the Catholic faith. So we need to be careful when we come in and we make statements like this. Maybe it would be better to say something like, in my experience, this is what I've experienced, and so I would encourage this, or something like that.
No. Today, our shepherds are far more concerned with keeping the doors open to the chancery than they are with saying the difficult stuff out loud. It seems that the only time you hear from your bishops is when it's time for the annual appeal, whereas we need our bishops to be vocal about the teachings of the church.
And this was weird to me too, because my bishop is very grounded in with the church, and I see him at the churches and at the cathedral and this. So that, again, that might be his experience, but he needs to be careful making blanket statements like this, because is it true? Is it his experience? Let's just be careful.
Setting aside their own personal comfort and embracing their cross. Our bishops are not politicians, but shepherds. So instead of
Well, and on that note, you're not a politician, you're a football player. Sorry.
fitting in the world by going along to get along, they too need to stay in their lane and lead. I say all of this.
The first time I watched this, I actually laughed at that. It's like, you just spent, okay, we are now almost halfway through his speech, and he has spent basically the entire half of this speech talking poorly about priests and bishops. Now, something, when I went online, I went on TikTok, I went on YouTube, and I'm looking at the commentary coming out on the media. I'm looking at the news media on this topic. I have not heard anybody talk about him bashing the priests and the bishops. So apparently in society, that's okay. Everybody wants to talk about feminism and these other things, but I'm very concerned at the way he was bashing the priesthood and the church, and presenting it in such a way that doesn't capture my experience. I'll just put it that way, because I'm just one person, right? This is just my opinion, my commentary. But we're about halfway through here, and that's all that he's been hammering on. So let's see how this shifts.
Not from a place of anger, as we get the leaders we deserve. But this does make me reflect on staying in my lane.
I almost feel like if this was an address to perhaps future priests, that would make more sense. But I'm a little confused about why he selected that as a topic when he's not going into the priesthood, he's not a priest, and he's not speaking to people. So it seemed a little bit that if he wants to touch on some of this, I think he could have collapsed that into something shorter. And cut out some of just the bashing, and make some points that are good and of value and provide encouragement and create not division in the church, but work for the building up of the church.
Focusing on my own vocation and how I can be a better father and husband and live in the world, but not be of it. Focusing on my vocation while praying and fasting for these men will do more for the church than me complaining about her leaders.
So that's interesting that he landed on that after 10 minutes of complaining about the leaders. So, I mean, at least he brought that in the end where he's like, okay, but I don't know. That's just kind of funny.
Because there seems to be so much confusion coming from our leaders, there needs to be concrete examples for people to look to in places like Benedictine, a little Kansas college built high on a bluff above the Missouri River, are showing the world how an ordered, Christ-centered existence is the recipe for success.
So is he saying that the priests need to look to the students of Benedictine College as a good example of leadership? Is that what he's saying?
You need to look no further than the examples all around this campus, where over the past 20 years, enrollment has doubled, construction and revitalization are a constant part of life, and people, the students, the faculty and staff, are thriving.
See, I think that there's a way to build up without putting someone else down. And I don't know if he really captured that properly. It felt like putting down the priesthood and then building up the students. That's just how it felt like to me.
This didn't happen by chance. In a deliberate movement to embrace traditional Catholic values, Benedictine has gone from just another liberal arts school with nothing to set it apart to a thriving beacon of light and a reminder to us all that when you embrace tradition, success, worldly and spiritual, will follow. I am certain the reporters at the AP could not have imagined that their attempt to rebuke and embarrass places and people like those here at Benedictine wouldn't be met with anger, but instead met with excitement and pride. Not the deadly sin sort of pride that has an entire month dedicated to it, but the true God-centered pride that is cooperating with the Holy Ghost to glorify Him.
So something that I want to say here, when it comes to sharing your story and stepping into the place where you can make the most impact on your audience, I think it's really, really important when it comes to the concept of diplomacy to figure out who your audience is. Where does your experience and expertise meet the audience in a way that you can make the greatest amount of impact? It's really important to choose your lane. Figure out what your lane is. Choose your battles. Choose those hills that you might die on. This sounds like he's talking about a lot of different hills that are not his hills, potentially. I'm just saying that we need to be careful in selecting the topics that we're going to cover and making sure that we're doing it in a way that is diplomatic and not making fun or throwing shade. And it feels up to this point in the speech that he's doing quite a bit of sort of making fun and throwing shade. And he is delivering it in a way that is masked by this idea of delivering hard truths. And something that really gets me is people that have that kind of attitude, like, oh, I'm going to share this hard truth, and they just come across as being arrogant and tone deaf. So I think that there really needs to be a stepping back and a humbling of figuring out how can I speak into this audience in a way that's going to be received well and not come across like I'm putting people down. When it comes to a Catholic audience, it needs to be centered around Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ wouldn't be making fun of LGBTQ. That's all I'm saying. And maybe that's controversial to say, but I just don't think that that was kind-hearted. And because when it comes down to it, everybody has their own story. Everybody has the sin that they're struggling with, every single person on this planet. And so I think it's really important that us as Catholics, us as Christians, us as followers of Jesus Christ need to make sure that we are bringing a heart into sharing our story in a way that is going to really resonate. And we're not going to be able to resonate with everyone, but you know what we can do? We can choose not to trash other people's lanes. We can park in our lane and reach the people that will resonate without having to put other people down. That's how I feel.
Reading that article now shared all over the world, we see that in the complete surrender of self and a turning towards Christ, you will find happiness. Right here in a little town in Kansas, we find many inspiring lay people using their talents. President Minnis, Dr. Swafford, and Dr. Zimmerer are a few great examples right here on this very campus that will keep the light of Christ burning bright for generations to come. Being locked in with your vocation and staying in your lane is going to be the surest way for you to find true happiness and peace in this life.
You know, something that I would have liked to see, since he went through 10 minutes of trashing the priesthood, it would have been nice to see him. I know he mentioned Bishop Barron, which is cool, but I think that it would have been cool for him to maybe land on speaking to some of the inspiring leadership in the Catholic Church, talking about them in relationship to the priesthood, because he did that on the university side. It would have been nice to see that kind of bow tied, and it would have lifted the conversation into something more positive. That's just a little bit of feedback.
It is essential that we focus on our own state in life, whether that be as a layperson, a priest, or religious.
See, again, the focusing on our own state in life, I would have loved to hear his entire speech from that thesis point. Instead of going out here in the land of throwing shade at other things, I think he clearly has some interesting things to say. And I think that he has an interesting story, clearly. I would have liked to hear him actually anchor to that and feel more confident in sharing from his own lane and not feeling like he needed to go out and bash other things. Because some of the times when he actually goes into his own story and he's talking more authentically about his experience, it's great and it's really interesting. And I'd love to hear more on that side. And I think it would actually serve to resonate more with a larger audience.
Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 2024, you are sitting at the edge of the rest of your lives. Each of you has the potential to leave a legacy that transcends yourselves and this era of human existence. In the small ways, by living out your vocation, you will ensure that God's church continues and the world is enlightened by your example.
I just have to say he used some really beautiful phrases and words there, and there are moments in his speech that are extremely inspirational, very well put, and moving. And so I want to make sure that I'm bringing in that as a part of this commentary as well, is that there are some ways that, yeah, it was like, but there are some things he's saying that are actually really, really good. So I want to bring that in as well, because it's important. He is definitely speaking into some hearts that need to be said. I just think that overall could have more diplomacy in some places.
For the ladies present today, congratulations on an amazing accomplishment.
I'm going to pause it right there. Okay, we're about to get into the big controversy, the big one online, which I think there are other big ones in this speech, but everyone's talking about the woman thing. He just congratulated the women on a huge accomplishment. Okay, so keep that in mind. He did congratulate them on a huge accomplishment.
Be proud of all that you have achieved to this point in your young lives.
Be proud of all that you've achieved. Okay?
I want to speak directly to you briefly because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you.
Now, I'm going to stop it here. I had to say, as soon as he said this, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm with him, because there have been many diabolical lies told to women. There's a huge attack on women. I talk a lot about destructive feminism. So I think he's spot on with what he's saying right now, just what he said just now, right? I think he could have given a disclaimer at this point, given what he's about to go into now. We'll talk about that. Listen again.
How many of you are sitting here now, about to cross this stage, and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you are going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world.
Okay, so that was the big controversy that everybody's freaking out about. But what I want to say here is that when he said about the diabolical lies that are told to women, what I think would have really helped him here is if he had given a disclaimer or explained what those lies are. I think this was an accidental gap in his speech that if he had filled that gap, none of this controversy probably would have happened, because I actually kind of feel bad for the guy in this place, because when you hear what he's saying, he's like, okay, diabolical lies women have been told, after he congratulates them. And then he goes into talking about career. And then he's like, I know that most of you are probably just really excited to become mothers. I think if he had talked a little bit more about what are the lies, there wouldn't be this confusion, because I think that the discrepancy right now online and the explosions that are happening all over social media, it's because it seems like he's saying that the diabolical lie is going and getting a job, which I don't think that's actually what he's saying. And I would have really loved to hear what he had to say about the diabolical lies, because I talk a lot about destructive feminism myself. So anyway, I just want to offer that as my commentary as a Catholic woman that talks a lot about how women are under attack in society and pulled into narratives that are destructive, and they break down identity and social relationships, interpersonal relationships, and the family. I also want to say that men are under attack too. They're under attack in different ways, but let's hear what he has to say.
I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on this stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker.
So here you can hear that this is very core to his story. It's very authentic. It's very real to him. I think it's interesting too that his wife converted. So there's clearly an interesting story here. That's his authentic story. I really would have loved to hear more of this Harrison Butker. I want to hear more about this. I want to hear less about trashing the priesthood and all these things. But I also think that when it comes to vocation, when it comes to women, there are so many vocations that are important that maybe aren't wife and mother. And there are some women that are called to singleness. There are some women that are called to become a nun, right? There are huge vocations. Now, and I'm not trying to throw shade because I get the heart of what he's saying, and it's not bad what he's saying. I think where I feel bad for him is that he really could have hit this harder with some disclaimers, and I think he would have been more in the clear because let's face it, the call to motherhood and wifedom, that's awesome. It's epic. And there are so many women that talk about how when it comes to they go into their jobs and they're working and they're successful in their career and then they get married and they have kids and they're so happy to lean into that vocation. And that's where they find so much fulfillment. We also need to be really careful when it comes to looking at our audience, knowing our audience, seeing where these people are in their lives, and making sure that you're adding in that disclaimer, sharing your story unapologetically, yes, but also appreciating other lanes so that people can open up and feel more receptive to what you're saying. So they're not feeling like, oh, well, like I'm not, there would, I think could have been a way to tell that story in a way that wouldn't have maybe shut people down online. But I also have to say this audience clearly gave him a standing ovation. So they weren't mad about it. They were okay with it. But I will say, as a Catholic woman, I can see where there is room for a larger conversation here. This is what I mean. As public speakers and Catholics, we need to make sure that when we enter into a conversation, we are allowing people that are non-Catholic and Catholic alike, giving them a full breadth of what's going on so that it's not like we're trying to capture all of Catholicism in one little tiny thing, saying like my experience is all of Catholicism. And my concern with a large part of what he's saying is that it's coming across like blanket statements like this is all of Catholicism. All the priesthood is messed up. All the bishops, all of this. And that's a little bit concerning for me. But let's keep listening. It stops and it's like, if you like it, then you should put a ring on it. All the dancers walk in and that would be great. He smiles first. It's like, got my applause.
She's the primary educator to our children. She's the one who ensures I never let football or my business become a distraction from that of a husband and father. She's the person that knows me best at my core. And it is through our marriage that, Lord willing, we will both attain salvation. I say all of this to you because I have seen it firsthand, how much happier someone can be when they disregard the outside noise and move closer and closer to God's will in their life. Isabel's dream of having a career might not have come true, but if you asked her today if she has any regrets on her decision, she would laugh out loud without hesitation and say, heck no.
I think it's important to mention when it comes to calling and God's will, that's going to look different for each one of us. And I would have loved to hear him give that caveat because just that alone would have, I think, released some of any sort of confusion.
As a man who gets a lot of praise and has been given a platform to speak to audiences like this one today, I pray that I always use my voice for God and not for myself. Everything I am saying to you is not from a place of wisdom, but rather a place of experience. I am hopeful that these words will be seen as those from a man not much older than you, who feels it is imperative that this class, this generation, and this time in our society must stop pretending that the things we see around us are normal. Heterodox ideas abound even within Catholic circles. For let's be honest, there is nothing good about playing God with having children, whether that be your ideal number or the perfect time to conceive. No matter how you spin it, there is nothing natural about Catholic birth control. It is only in the past few years that I have grown in courage to speak more boldly and directly, because as I mentioned earlier, I have leaned into my vocation as a husband and father, and as a man. To the gentlemen here today, part of what plagues our society is this lie that has been told to you that men are not necessary in the home or in our communities.
So something that I want to point out here is that we are 15 minutes into his speech. He has about 5 minutes left, and this is the first time that he is addressing the men, the lay men. That to me is a little bit frustrating that he spent 15 minutes where he spent it. You know, we've just gone through it, and now he's going to address the men. I feel like he had an opportunity to really be in his lane, and he's arrived now after trashing a lot, but doing, also saying some wonderful things about his wife. Beautiful, 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 but missing some things, right? Missing some opportunities for diplomacy and disclaimers, but now he's arrived. And I want to hear okay, well, what's your message then? If it's to look within and we really need to look at our call and God's will for our lives, what do you have to say then? What do you have to say to the men? Because this is your lane.
As men, we set the tone of the culture. And when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. This absence of men in the home is what plays a large role in the violence we see all around the nation. Other countries do not have nearly the same absentee father rates as we find here in the U.S., and a correlation could be made in their drastically lower violence rates as well. Be unapologetic in your masculinity, fighting against the cultural emasculation of men. Do hard things. Never settle for what is easy. You might have a talent that you don't necessarily enjoy, but if it glorifies God, maybe you should lean into that over something that you might think suits you better.
See, these up to this point feel a little bit like tropes. He got a little specific just then, but it's like, okay, be unapologetically masculine. He mentioned you need to be in the home. If you have a hobby, okay.
I speak from experience as an introvert who now finds myself as an amateur public speaker and an entrepreneur, something I never thought I'd be when I received my industrial engineering degree.
Okay, that's pretty interesting, actually.
The road ahead is bright.
And I like actually how that ties in from the beginning as he's really encouraging people to share their Catholic faith. So I think that was actually a really good tie in there. It made sense. It tied up.
Things are changing. Society is shifting, and people, young and old, are embracing tradition. Not only has it been my vocation that has helped me and those closest to me, but not surprising to many of you, should be my outspoken embrace of the traditional Latin Mass. I've been very vocal in my love and devotion to the TLM and its necessity for our lives.
So he spent about 1 minute, maybe that was maybe 30 seconds to a minute talking to men. He gave maybe 4 points, and now he's talking about the traditional Latin Mass. So across the board for a 20-minute speech, to spend that much time not in your lane and then spending 30 seconds talking to men was a little bit like, come on, let's figure out what your lane is and how to do that better, because I think that he has a huge propensity to really make an impact. He's a great speaker. He's got some really great things to say. I think with some tweaking, he could really make an impact. This now he's going to talk about the traditional Latin Mass, and so I want you to hear what he has to say.
But what I think gets misunderstood is that people who attend the TLM do so out of pride or preference. I can speak to my own experience, but for most people I have come across within these communities, this simply is not true. I do not attend the TLM because I think I am better than others, or for the smells and bells, or even for the love of Latin. I attend the TLM because I believe, just as the God of the Old Testament was pretty particular in how he wanted to be worshiped, the same holds true for us today. It is through the TLM that I encountered order and began to pursue it in my own life. Aside from the TLM itself, too many of our sacred traditions have been relegated to things of the past, when in my parish, things such as Ember Days, days when we fast and pray for vocations and for our priests, are still adhered to. The TLM is so essential that I would challenge each of you to pick a place to move where it is readily available.
So this, to me, again, makes me feel like he is elevating his lane over other lanes, because TLM, great, but do you have to throw shade at the other lanes? Be careful is all I'm saying. And I'm not saying that he was really throwing too much shade, but he did say if you're not Go into the TLM, find a church that has one. So I think it's important to say, and he did say, I'm speaking from my experience, but the Catholic faith is far and wide. People have propensities to go to the TLM or not. And that is fine because it's about the Eucharist. It's about the Eucharistic Mass in general. It's okay if you like TLM. It's okay if you don't. I know my mom, who was raised in the Latin Mass, after it was no longer in Latin, she was like, this is great. I can understand what's going on. This is, you know what I'm saying? And there are plenty of people that love post-Vatican II and how it shifted. And so I think it's just important to, again, respect that there are other lanes too outside your own. So just being careful about that.
A lot of people have complaints about the parish or the community, but we should not sacrifice the Mass for community. I prioritize the TLM even if the parish isn't beautiful, the priest isn't great, or the community isn't amazing. I still go to the TLM because I believe the holy sacrifice of the Mass is more important than anything else.
See, that was where it bothered me. The holy sacrifice of the Mass is more important than all else, but you can get that outside the TLM. That was my issue with that statement. So that's where we got to be really, really careful when we're making statements like that. That could be seen as throwing shade at somebody that's not going to the TLM.
I say this knowing full well that when each of you rekindle your knowledge and adherence to many of the church's greatest traditions, you will see how much more colorful and alive your life can and should be.
And that's assuming that those who go to TLM, their life is more vibrant and alive and they have more knowledge than the people that don't. That sounds a little bit not, be careful. That's all I'm going to say. Be careful.
As you move on from this place and enter into the world, know that you will face many challenges. Sadly, I'm sure many of you know of the countless stories of good and active members of this community who, after graduation and moving away from the Benedictine bubble, have ended up moving in with their boyfriend or girlfriend prior to marriage. Some even leave the church and abandon God. It is always heartbreaking to hear these stories, and there's a desire to know what happened and what went wrong. What you must remember is that life is about doing the small things well, setting yourself up for success, and surrounding yourself with people who continually push you to be the best version of you. I say this all the time, that iron sharpens iron. It's a great reminder that those closest to us should be making us better. If you are dating someone who doesn't even share your faith, how do you expect that person to help you become a saint? If your friend group is filled with people who only think about what you're doing next weekend and are not willing to have those difficult conversations, how can they help sharpen you? As you prepare to enter into the workforce, it is extremely important that you actually think about the places you are moving to. Who is the bishop? What kind of parishes are there? Do they offer the TLM and have priests who embrace their priestly vocation? Cost of living must not be the only arbiter of your choices, for a life without God is not a life at all, and the cost of salvation is worth more than any career. I'm excited for the future, and I pray that something I have said will resonate as you move on to the next chapter of your life. Never be afraid to profess the one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church, for this is the church that Jesus Christ established, through which we receive sanctifying grace.
So overall, I just want to say that I think that there were places where he really did great. I think there were places that he could have improved. I think the big word for the video today is diplomacy. Knowing our audience, knowing our lanes, finding the best way to approach that so that we can be received well, make the greatest amount of impact. And I really do wish the best for Harrison Butker. I think that there are ways that he can absolutely improve, but I mean that with love in my heart because I think it's great that he's stepping out as a Catholic man. I want to hear more of what he has to say to speak to men. I think that would be really powerful. I think also when we look at the social media climate right now with everything going on with the man versus bear and just all of these feminism conversations going on, I think we need more women speaking to women and men speaking to men. That's my opinion. That's just where I'm coming from because it can be really sticky when you try to dip your toe. And I've done that. Believe me, I've made the mistakes and I'm not perfect. I will make plenty more. But when you start to dip your toe into something that like it's not your lane, it can really blow up in your face. And there are ways that we can speak into different things, but disclaimers. I call myself the disclaimer queen. It's always important to throw a disclaimer at it. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And like I told you, welcome to Story Catholic. My name's Teresa, and I help Christians master their stories so they can impact the world. If this is something that you're looking to do, I'd love to talk to you. You can go down and click in the description below. There's a link where you can get in touch with me. I hope you'll have a wonderful, wonderful day. Make sure that you subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.